Let's please continue on. The issue of race. Vice President Biden, you say that President Trump's response to the violence in Charlottesville 3 years ago, when he talked about very fine people on both sides, was what directly led you to launch this run for president.
Oh, yeah, sure.
President Trump, you have often said that you believe you have done more for black Americans than any president, with the possible exception of Abraham Lincoln. My question for the two of you is, why should voters trust you rather than your opponent to deal with the race issues facing this country over the next 4 years? Vice President Biden, you go first.
It's about equity and equality. It's about decency. It's about the Constitution. And we have never walked away from trying to require equity for everyone, equality for the whole of America. But we've never accomplished it. But we've never walked away from it like he has done. It is true. The reason I got in the race is when those people, close your eyes, remember what those people look like coming out of the fields carrying torches, their veins bulging, just spewing anti-Semitic bile, and accompanied by the Ku Klux Klan. A young woman got killed. And they asked the president what he thought. He said there were very fine people on both sides. No president has ever said anything like that.
It is whose
now,
2 minutes, sir.
Second point I'd make to you is that when Floyd was killed, when Mr. Floyd was killed, there was a peaceful protest in front of the White House. What did he do? He came out of his bunker, had the military use tear gas on him so he could walk across to a church and hold up a Bible. And then what happened after that? The bishop of that very church said that it was a disgrace. The general who was with him said all he ever wants to do is divide people, not unite people at all. This is a president who has used everything as a dog whistle to try to generate racist hatred, racist division. This is a man who, in fact, you talk about helping African Americans. 1 in 1,000 African Americans has been killed because of the coronavirus. And if he doesn't do something quickly, by the end of the year, 1 in 500 will have been killed. 1 in 500 African Americans. This man is a savior of African Americans. This man cares at all. This man's done virtually nothing. Look, the fact is that you have to look at what he talks about. You have to look at what he did. And what he did has been disastrous for the African-American community.
So, President Trump, you have 2 minutes. Why should Americans trust you over your opponent to deal with racism?
He did a crime bill, 1994, where you call them super predators, African Americans, the super predators, and they've never forgotten it. They've never forgotten it, Joe.
No, sir, it's his 2 minutes.
So you did that, and they call you a super predator, and I'm letting people out of jail now that you have treated the African American population community, you have treated the black community about as bad as anybody in this country. You did the 1990, and that's why, if you look at the polls, I'm doing better than any Republican has done in a long time, because they saw what you did. You call them super predators, and you've called them worse than that, because you look back at your testimony over the years, you've called them a lot worse than that. As far as the church is concerned, and as far as the generals are concerned, we just got the support of 250 military leaders and generals, total support. Law enforcement, almost every law enforcement group in the United States. I have Florida, I have Texas, I have Ohio, I have Portland. The sheriff just came out today and he said, I support President Trump. I don't think you have any law enforcement. You can't even say the word law enforcement, because if you say those words, you're going to lose all of your radical left supporters. And why aren't you saying those words, Joe? Why don't you say the words law enforcement? Because you know what? If they called us in Portland, we would put out that fire in a half an hour, but they won't do it because they're run by radical left Democrats. If you look at Chicago, if you look at any place you want to look, Seattle, they heard we were coming in the following day, and they put up their hands, and we got back Seattle. Minneapolis, we got it back, Joe, because we believe in law and order, but you don't. The top 10 cities and just about the top 40 cities are run by Democrats and, in many cases, radical left. And they've got you wrapped around their finger, Joe, to a point where you don't want to say anything about law and order. And I'll tell you what, the people of this country want and demand law and order, and you're afraid to even say it.
All right. I want to return to the question of race. Vice President Biden, after the grand jury in the Breonna Taylor case decided not to charge any of the police with homicide. You said it raises the question, quote, whether justice could be equally applied in America. Do you believe that there is a separate but unequal system of justice for blacks in this country?
Yes, there is. There's systemic injustice in this country, in education and work and in law enforcement and the way in which it's enforced. But look, the vast majority of police officers are good, decent, honorable men and women. They risk their lives every day to take care of us. But there are some bad apples. And when they occur, when they find them, they have to be sorted out. They have to be held accountable. They have to be held accountable. And what I'm going to do as President of the United States is call together an entire group of people at the White House, well, everything from the civil rights groups to the police officers, the police chiefs, and we're going to work this out. We're going to work this out so we change the way in which we have more transparency in when these things happen. These cops aren't happy to see what happened to George Floyd. These cops aren't happy to see what happened to Breonna Taylor. Most don't like it. But we have to have a system where people are held accountable. And by the way, violence in response is never appropriate. Never appropriate. Peaceful protest is. Violence is never appropriate.
All right.
What is peaceful protest? When they run through the middle of a town and burn down your stores and kill people all over the place, and you say peaceful protest?
President Trump,
no, it's
I'm not
not,
asking.
but you say it is.
President Trump, I'd like to continue with the issue of race. I promise we're going to get to the issue of law and order in a moment.
Fine.
This month, your administration directed federal agencies to end racial sensitivity training that addresses white privilege or critical race theory. Why did you decide to do that, to end racial sensitivity training? And do you believe that there is systemic racism in this country, sir?
I ended it because it's racist. I ended it because a lot of people were complaining that they were asked to do things that were absolutely insane, that it was a radical revolution that was taking place in our military, in our schools, all over the place, and you know it, and so does everybody else. And he would know.
What is radical about racial sensitivity training, sir?
If you were a certain person, you had no status in life. It was sort of a reversal. And if you look at the people, we were paying people hundreds of thousands of dollars to teach very bad ideas and, frankly, very sick ideas. And really, they were teaching people to hate our country. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to allow that to happen. We have to go back to the core values of this country. They were teaching people that our country is a horrible place, it's a racist place, and they were teaching people to hate our country. And I'm not going to allow that to happen.
Vice President Biden?
Nobody's doing that. He's the racist.
You just don't know.
Here's the deal. I know a lot more about this than he does.
Let him finish.
The fact is that there is racial insensitivity. People have to be made aware of what other people feel like, what insults them, what is demeaning to them. It's important that people know they don't want to. Many people don't want to hurt other people's feelings, but it makes a big difference. It makes a gigantic difference in the way a child is able to grow up and have a sense of self-esteem. It's a little bit like how this guy and his friends look down on so many people. They look down their nose on people like Irish Catholics like me and grew up in Scranton. They look down on people who don't have money. They look down on people who are of a different faith. They look down on people who are a different color. In fact, we're all Americans. The only way we're going to bring this country together is bring everybody together. There's nothing we cannot do if we do it together. We can take this on and we can defeat racism in America.
President Trump, sir.
During the Obama-Biden administration, there was tremendous division. There was hatred. You look at Ferguson, you go to many places. Look at Oakland. Look what happened in Oakland. Look what happened in Baltimore. Look what happened. Frankly, it was more violent than what I'm even seeing now.
Oh, my
But
Lord.
the reason is that
ridiculous.
the Democrats that run these cities don't want to talk like you about law and order.
Violent
and you
crime,
still haven't mentioned.
violent
Are you
crime.
in favor of law and order?
I'm in favor of law. You follow it.
Are you in favor of law and order? Go
yes,
ahead,
I'm
say
in
it.
favor.
You
Everybody's
asked a
in favor
question,
of
let him finish.
Law and order.
Lose his
Law
left.
and
Let
order.
him answer.
Law and order with justice, where people get treated fairly.
Okay.
And the fact of the matter is, violent crime went down 15% in our administration.
All right.
It's gone up on his watch.
Went down
He-
much more more
he
in
had-
ours.
All right, we're now,
is president of
Mr.
the
President,
United
you're going
States
to,
of America.
We
Mr.
were
President,
breaking every record in the
Mr.
book.
President, you're going to be very happy because
And the
we're now going to
places-
talk about law and order.
Places we had trouble were Democratic-run cities.
That's
and
exactly
states.
my question.
Democratic-
There has been a dramatic increase in homicides in America this summer particularly, and you often blame that on Democratic mayors and Democratic governors, but in fact there have been equivalent spikes in Republican-led cities like Tulsa and Fort Worth. So the question is this really a party issue?
I think it's a party issue. You can bring in a couple of examples, but if you look at Chicago, what's going on in Chicago, where 53 people were shot and 8 died shot. If you look at New York, where it's going up like nobody's ever seen anything, the numbers are going up 100, 150, 200%. Crime. It is
cities.
crazy what's going on. And he doesn't want to say law and order because he can't, because he'll lose his radical left supporters. And once he does that, it's over with. But if he ever got to run this country and they ran it the way he would want to run it, we would have our suburbs would be gone. By the way, our suburbs would be gone, and you would see problems like you've never seen.
He would know a suburb unless he took a wrong turn.
Oh, I know suburbs.
He would not.
So much
I was
better.
raised,
Go ahead. Wait a minute.
I was raised in the suburbs. This is not 1950. All these dog whistles and racism don't work anymore. Suburbs are by and large integrated. There's many people today driving their kids to soccer practice and or to black and white and Hispanic in the same car as there have been any time in the past. What really is a threat to the suburbs and their safety is his failure to deal with COVID. They're dying in the suburbs. His failure to deal with the environment. They're being flooded. They're being burned out because his refusal to do anything. That's why the suburbs are in trouble.
I do want to talk about this issue of law and order, though. And in the joint recommendation that came from the Biden-Bernie Sanders task force, you talked about, quote, reimagining policing. Yeah. First of all, what does reimagining policing mean, and do you support?
It means.
Let me, if I might finish the question. What does reimagining policing mean, and do you support the Black Lives Matter call for community control of policing?
Look, what I support is the police having the opportunity to deal with the problems they face. And I'm totally opposed to defunding the police officers. As a matter of fact, local police, the only one defunding it, his budget calls for a $400 million cut in local law enforcement assistance. They need more assistance. They need, when they show up for a 9/11 call, to have someone with them as a psychologist or psychiatrist to keep them from having to use force and be able to talk people down. We have to have community policing like we had before, where the officers get to know the people in the communities. That's when crime went down. It didn't go up, it went down. And so we have to be engaged.
That's not what they're talking about, Chris. That's not what they're talking about. He's talking about defunding the police.
That is not true.
He doesn't have any law support.
Look,
he has no law enforcement support.
That's not true.
Almost nothing.
Look.
Oh, really? Who do you have? Name one group that supports you. Name one group that came out and supported you. Go ahead.
Look,
think. We have time.
We don't have time to do anything.
No, think
all right.
about it. Name one law enforcement group that came out and supported you.
Gentlemen, I think I'm going to take back the moderator's role,
I don't think there are any.
And I want to get to another subject, which is the issue of protests in many cities that have turned violent. In Portland, Oregon, especially, we had more than 100 straight days of protests, which I think you would agree. You talk about peaceful protests. Many of those turned into riots. Mr. Vice President, you say that people who commit crimes should be held accountable. The question I have, though, is, as the Democratic nominee, and earlier tonight you said that you are the Democratic Party right now, have you ever called the Democratic mayor of Portland or the Democratic governor of Oregon and said, hey, you got to stop this, bring in the National Guard, do whatever it takes, but you stop the days and months of violence in Portland?
I don't hold public office now. I am a former vice president. I've made it clear in my public statements that the violence should be prosecuted. It should be prosecuted, and anyone who commits it
but
should
you've never called for the people,
the
leader. Excuse me, sir. You have never called for the leaders in Portland and in Oregon to bring in the National Guard and knock off 100 days of riots.
They can, in fact, take care of it if he just stay out of the way. Look here.
Oh, really?
Really? Here's the thing.
I sent in the U.S. Marshals to get the killer of the young man in the middle of the street. They shot him, and for 3 days,
President Trump
Portland wouldn't do anything. I had to send in the U.S. Marshals. They took care of business.
Go ahead, sir.
And by the way, you know, his own former spokesperson said, you know, riots and chaos and violence help his cause. That's what this is all about.
I don't know who said that.
I do.
Who?
I think Kellyanne Conway.
I don't think she said that.
She said that. And so here's the
all right.
But here's the point.
Go ahead,
the point is that that's what he is, keeps trying to rile everything up. He doesn't want to calm things down. Instead of going in and talking to people and saying, let's get everybody together, figure out how to deal with this. What's he do? He just pours gasoline in the fire constantly, and every single solitary time.
Okay, and to end this, button up this segment, I'm going to give you a minute to answer, sir. You have repeatedly criticized.
I have to answer his statement.
No, you have repeatedly.
Wait,
you have
no,
you've been talking back
and forth.
He made a
statement.
I'm asking you.
I would love to
end it,
sir. I would love to end it.
And you know, if you want to switch seats.
We could very quickly.
We could do that, but I'm
send in the National Guard. It would be over. There'd be no problem.
Okay,
but they don't want to accept the National Guard.
You have repeatedly criticized the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing extremist groups. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm
prepared
to do
specifically
that,
do it?
Well, go ahead, sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it.
Do you want to call him? What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
who would
white
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing.
FBI director
This is a left-wing problem.
White supremacists. Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got to be
not
kidding.
malicious. That's what his FBI. FBI director said.
Well, then you know what?
No, we're done, sir. We're moving on to the next. We're moving.
When a bat hits you over the head, that's not an idea.
Everybody in your administration tells you the truth has a bad idea.
Can I tell you what?
You have no ideas.
Antifa is a danger.